Chadden really detests Himmelstoss because Himmelstoss decided to teach him a lesson in its own special way back in the barracks. Chadden wets the bed. When he is asleep at night, it just happens. Himmelstoss insisted that it was pure laziness and wouldn't be persuaded otherwise, so he came up with a method of curing Chadden that was really typical of the man. He hunted out another bedwetter from one of the other barracks, a man called Kindervater, and put him in with Chadden. The barracks were where we did our training had the usual arrangements of bunks, one bed above the other, with the bottom part of each bed made of wire mesh. Himmelstoss arranged so that the pair of them were together, one on the top and the other on the bottom bunk. The one underneath, of course, had a really raw deal. To compensate, they had to change places for the next night so that the one from the bottom bunk got the top bunk and could get his revenge. That was Himmelstoss's idea of self-help. It was mean-minded, but logically it was sound. Unfortunately, it didn't work because the basic premises were wrong. It wasn't laziness that made either of the two men do it. Anyone could see that by looking at their sickly complexions. The whole business ended with them taking it in turns to sleep on the floor. The one doing that could easily have caught his death of cold. Meanwhile, Haye had come down and sat between us. He gives me a glance with his eyes twinkling and rubs his great paws thoughtfully. He and I shared the best day of our army career. It was the night before we had to go off to the front. We had been assigned to one of the newly formed regiments, but before that, we had been ordered back to the garrison for kitting out, not to the recruiting depot though, but one of the other barracks. The morning after that, we would be leaving very early. That evening, we set out to get even with Himmelstoss. We had sworn weeks before that we would. Kropp had even gone so far as to declare that after the war, he would try for an administrative job in the postal service so that later on, when Himmelstoss was a postman again, he could get to be his boss. He painted a rosy picture of how he would clobber him. That was the real reason that Himmelstoss never managed to grind us down. We always counted on the fact that we'd get him sometime, by the end of the war, at the latest. Meanwhile, we wanted to give him a damn good hiding. It means they're going to spank him. What could they do to us if he didn't recognize us and if we were off early the next morning anyway? We knew what bar he spent his evenings in. To get from the bar back to the barracks, he had to go down a dark lane without any buildings. We lay in wait for him there, hiding behind a pile of rocks. I had a quilt cover with me. We were trembling with anticipation, wondering if he would be on his own. At last we heard his footsteps. That was a sound we knew very well indeed. We heard him often enough in the mornings when the door would fly open and he would bellow, "Out of bed!" "On his own?" whispered Kropp. "On his own." Chad and I crept around the pile of rocks. We could already see the light reflected off his belt buckle. Himmelstoss seemed to be a bit tipsy and he was singing. He went past without noticing a thing. We got a firm grip on the quilt cover, moved forward quietly, slipped it over his head from behind and pulled it downwards so that he stood there as if in a white sack, unable to move his arms. The singing died away. The next moment, Haye Westes was there. He pushed us aside with his arms spread out, just so that he could have the first go. With great delight, he took up a stance, raised his arm like a railway signal, his hand as big as a shovel, and gave the white sack a wallop that would have felled an ox. Himmelstoss lost his balance, rolled half a dozen yards, and started to yell. We thought of that as well and brought a pillow with us. Haye squatted down, put the pillow on his knee, grabbed it where he guessed Himmelstoss's head to be, and shoved it into the pillow. The noise was stifled right away. Haye let him take a breath from time to time, and what came from his throat then was a wonderful high-pitched shriek that soon got cut off. Now Chadden unbuttoned Himmelstoss's braces and pulled his trousers down. Meanwhile, he had held a cane carpet beater between his teeth. He then stood up and moved to action. It was a wonderful sight. Himmelstoss on the ground, Haye bending over him, holding the man's head on his knees, with a fiendish grin on his face, his mouth wide open with delight, and then the twitching striped underpants, and the knock-kneed pair of legs which, trousers around the ankles, were performing spectacular movements with every blow that fell, and Chadden, who showed no signs of tiring, standing over him like a woodcutter. In the end, we literally had to pull him away so that we could have our turns. At last, Haye pulled Himmelstoss to his feet again and gave a private performance as the final act. He drew his right arm so far back before clouting him that it looked as if he was trying to pluck the stars out of the night sky. Himmelstoss went down. Haye picked him up again, lined him up, and gave him a second magnificently aimed wallop with his left hand. Himmelstoss howled and fled on all fours. His striped postman's backside shone in the moonlight. We made ourselves scarce as fast as we could. Haye looked around and said it with an air of grim satisfaction, though a bit oddly, revenge is as good as a feast. In fact, Himmelstoss should have been pleased. His principle that we should train each other had borne fruit when we used it on him. We had been dutiful pupils, quick to pick up his methods.